So hello and welcome, it's Neil Dougan here. It's module 13 and we're looking at the science of the microbiome. So the microbiome it's a reasonably modern term, or modernly used in modern times at least, term to actually describe all of the biota that's existing within our bodies. So our body is made up of our own cells, about 30 trillion of our own cells. There's about 70 trillion bacteria that inhabit the same space. There's somewhere in the order of 1,000 trillion viruses that inhabit this space. I'm not quite sure how many parasites and fungi are within the space as well, but it's a very, very large number. So they're extraordinarily large numbers that we're talking about here. All of it, including our own cells, make up the microbiome. So what does it do? Well, it makes us up. So the microbiome is everything that is in our body. And of course, given that every entity, including everything from a virus up, has layers of consciousness, all the way up to the level of thought, if you wish. It's a bit difficult to actually consider a virus having a thought, but nonetheless, this can actually be described and explained. So we're talking about a whole range of entities here, all of which share various levels of consciousness. There's an overarching layer of consciousness which describes what it means to be an animal, for example, and there's a further overlying layer of consciousness which describes what it is to be human. So given the scale and complexity of the microbiome, the critical factor is for it all to be communicating and collaborating and cooperating. We described this in some detail yesterday in the philosophy video. However, what we're looking at with the microbiome is, or what I want to consider, I want to talk to you a little bit about, is the ways in which this communication occurs. It's far more subtle than you might imagine, and but anyway, we'll begin by talking about the physical communication that goes on between aspects or elements of the microbiome. So we'll start with the very small organisms. We're talking about viruses here. A virus is really a piece of DNA with a capsule and a few other bits and pieces to keep it in existence while it's looking for a host. And the virus does all of its work, or most of its work actually, inside the cell. So it's invited into the cell and it goes about doing its business and gets reproduced and spread to other cells. So the virus in itself can in that way be seen as a piece of information which is being moved from place to place to place. It also has its own consciousness, but it's transmitting information predominantly via the DNA. So the DNA messaging is actually the communication process. Same thing goes for the DNA within larger organisms as well, such as bacteria, fungus, parasites, and indeed in our own cells as well. The DNA is a mechanism for transfer of information from one cell to another, from one bacteria to a cell, from a bacteria to a virus, from a bacteria to a fungus. The DNA, or more correctly, it's actually the RNA, which is copies of parts of the DNA, is the mechanism for transferring information from place to place, cell to cell, organism to organism. In addition to that, there's a tremendous variety of chemical signaling going on between all of these entities. So the virus will stimulate a cell to give chemical signaling to other cells or to other entities within your body. The virus itself doesn't actually do that chemical signaling so much, but it certainly instructs the cell to do that. And so chemical signaling is really the next big layer of communication processes that go on within all these different entities. So we're familiar with the idea of the hormonal system, or that entire way in which one cell can actually send out a particular chemical, and particularly where you have a group of cells which are very, very similar. So for example, in your thyroid gland, there's a whole group of cells that produce a range of chemicals, and these chemicals go and signal in exactly the same way an individual bacteria is able to signal, and once again the bacteria are able to receive this chemical signaling coming into them, and they can make new choices, new decisions based on that information that's coming in. There's all kinds of electrical signaling going on between these various entities as well, so we're thinking normally about the nervous system as being the majority of the electrical signaling that goes on around our body, but where two cells butt up against each other, for example, this is just one example here, and one of these cells could be a bacteria, and the other cell could be one of the cells of our body, and where we will think about this microbiome being predominantly held as within the digestive system. So if we think about the colon, it's jam-packed full of bacteria, and where one bacteria is actually up against another bacteria, there can be electrical signaling going between the two bacteria. Equally between the bacteria and the gut wall, there can be electrical signaling going across there as well. One of the wonderful scientific discoveries is that every single cell is able to transmit like a radio transmitter. And so what we're talking about here is electromagnetic frequency transmissions, and so each cell is acting like an antenna, transmitting information out, and equally they're actually receiving information in. So radio waves, we could describe them as, are coming into the cell, and the cell wall itself is actually, or the enclosure of the cell is actually acting as the antenna, both for transmission and for receiving. We're well aware of the subtle energy systems within the body, and we're talking here of the common ones such as the chakra system and the meridian systems, but there are many other subtle energy systems within the body, and right down to the level of a virus. There is the heart chakra operating, for example, and the heart chakra of a virus is actually able to communicate information. So we're talking about subtle energy communication. I'm just using that one example, but there are many different layers and levels of the subtle energy systems, and different types as well, which all can actually assist the communication between one entity to another entity. Near enough to the top of the type of communication that's possible between all of these entities is at the level of thoughts and emotions. So when I talk about thoughts, I mean I include emotions actually in that term. So I'm talking about emotional thoughts, intellectual thoughts. I'm also talking about practical thoughts. So if we were considering a bacteria and the information it may wish to share with another bacteria, for example, well, in that type of practical thought level, information may well be the appropriate, the most appropriate form of communication to be going on. Nonetheless, it's entirely conceivable, particularly with the collaborative effort that we're talking about, where everybody's joining together here now. We've got all of the viruses, bacteria, fungus, and our own cells in operation. Then there's a real opportunity for that bacteria to be extending some information at the level of the intellect as well. Alright, well look, I hope you found that information useful. If you have any questions about how the microbiome operates, we're running webinars on the subject of various aspects of the microbiome and how we get more balance and harmony, better communication, better cooperation, collaboration going on. So look out for those if you have specific questions or want to know more about the actual operation of the microbiome. However, for the purposes of this video, I just wanted to explain the complexity of it and how it actually is doing its communication, because the science of what we're talking about here really is all about the science of communication within these various entities. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks very much.